and welcome to the feedback for the April assessment. I'm going to do this in two short videos just like I did the last one. So the first video will be for research methods and the second video will be for the attachment section. So if you want to just go through it the same as you did last time, I'll give you kind of running commentary as to what the mark scheme said for each of the questions. You need to annotate your script as follows for the deadline given to you by your individual teachers. So the first question was a hypothesis question, and the marks, I have to be honest, were really quite varied on this question. There were a lot of people getting full credit who had, if you can see here, it says 2 marks for a clear operationalized hypothesis, i.e. for the dependent variable you were referring to the anxiety score specifically, and you'd also saying that there was going to be kind of like a change in the score, i.e. the score would be different at the end to what it would have been at the beginning. So you can see there 2 marks where the hypothesis was fully operationalized and the direction of difference was really clear. So it says here 1 mark for a direction of difference which is clear with partial evidence for operationalisation, but you'd not necessarily referred to the anxiety scores being reduced. You'd maybe said that they were going to experience a reduction in anxiety, but if you see the difference between the top one and the bottom one, the people who got 1 mark really didn't say that it was going to be an anxiety score which was reduced. You can see at the bottom there were 0 marks given for any of the following things that were written as a question. Non-directional hypotheses, so anybody who'd said that there would be a difference in anxiety, that's not necessarily correct because it needed to be saying that there was going to be a reduction in anxiety scores. So saying that there was just going to be a difference, that wouldn't have got you any credit. Any aims, and then there were a handful on this question who were just really muddled up. I don't think you'd practiced the structure for writing a hypothesis very much before this CEDAR assessment. So it was clear that you understood that there was going to be some sort of difference in anxiety, but the way that you'd worded it was just kind of all jumbled up and didn't really have any sort of clarity. So just to clarify then, the best answers were the ones that said students will have a lower anxiety score after the intervention programme than before. You could have also got 2 marks for saying students taking part in an anxiety reduction programme will show a reduction in anxiety scores as long as you had that on the end, and then 1 mark for anything other than that answer. So anxiety will reduce after the anxiety reduction programme, but no reference to the scores. So it was really the reference to the anxiety scores being lower on that second occasion that got you those second marks. So into the second question, which was to design a consent form. Now, I know personally for my students, there are going to be a lot of you that are really frustrated with yourselves and kick yourselves on this question, because there were massive amounts of you who had really good understanding of what went into a consent form, but what you didn't do is apologies for the screen, it just keeps going a bit wiffly waffly, but you didn't do this. You didn't write it to the parent or guardian. Now, the question actually says that it's got to be written to the parents or guardian, and as you can see at the end there, it says design a consent form that might have been given to parents or guardians asking for the permission for their child to take part. So you weren't getting the credit there at all, because you didn't write it to the parent guardian. No credit can be gained for a consent form designed for the actual participant rather than their parents and guardians. And also you can see here that second bullet point There's no credit for a description of what goes into a consent form rather than actually writing the consent form to the participants. So either of those options wouldn't have received any credit out of 5 marks in total. So as I said, there'll be a number of you who are really frustrated there because you knew what to put into a consent form, but you didn't follow the guidance of the question. So we can see here that for 5 marks in total, the consent form has got to be addressed to the parents' guardians, but it's also got to be done in an appropriate tone or style. So it's got to be written in a very formal manner so that you would be addressing them as you would in a face-to-face interview or face-to-face meeting. The second bullet point is where a number of you dropped marks, so you have to have given sufficient detail about the investigation for the parents to make an informed decision. So in the stimulus, it had given you details such as the programme would last for 6 weeks in total, and every 6 weeks they would sit through a 30-minute session. So a lot of you had kind of given them the option to withdraw the data, the right to anonymity, telling them that they were what you were investigating, i.e. the effectiveness of an anxiety programme, but you didn't give them those specific details. And also you can see there, you didn't actually give them an option to tick or to maybe give an answer that said, I specifically consent for my child to take part in this. So for anybody who did all of those things, obviously it would have been a 5 straight away. But if you read your answer back to yourself now, you might see that some of those things were lacking, specifically the detail for a lot of you. So for a lot of my students, I put them into 3, which was reasonable. So there was some clear and concise information given, and it was mainly relevant, and it did have sufficient information for the parent guardian to make an informed decision, but it just wasn't elaborated enough. So yeah, a lot of you getting 3 marks, and then I also put a lot of students into 2, where I just didn't think that if the parent or guardian was actually filling in that consent form, they didn't know enough about what the investigation was going to involve for their child. So yeah, that question, very, very easy to pick up marks if you did everything that the question was asking you for, and if you knew kind of what to include in a consent form. Question number 3 was probably the most poorly answered question on the research methods section, because for the simple reason, a lot of you got reliability and validity muddled up, and that therefore had an impact on question 4 as well. So reliability was better than the definitions of validity, it has to be said. So reliability, a lot of you said that it was basically just consistency, so being able to repeat a study and getting consistent findings. Validity, a lot of you did use that phrase there, so whether or not an instrument is measuring what it claims to measure. A lot of you did actually get the marks for saying things such as internal validity is the extent to which extraneous variables have been controlled, allowing for cause and effect to be established. If you'd only said one of those things, so you'd said internal validity is establishing cause and effect, or internal validity is controlling extraneous variables, we wouldn't have given you it, because really internal validity is both of those things, and you had to say both of those things really to get that second mark. So like I said, a lot of you got the reliability mark, which is consistency, but the internal validity wasn't great. What I will say here is that it was obvious on questions 3 and 4 that reliability and validity is a very weak area for a number of you in this year group. It is quite sophisticated material, so I don't know whether all your teachers have told you this, but reliability and validity, typically we do it on the year 13 specification, but we've pulled it forward this year, so it is quite hard. But because of that, because it is quite difficult, we would recommend that you spend a little bit more time going back to it and kind of maybe trying to do some more questions. So what I've included on Moodle underneath this video link, is some instructions as to how to answer these reliability and validity questions. So if you really have performed badly on question 3 and 4, I would recommend going through those as well. So question 4, as I've already said, it was another question which was quite poorly answered because it was quite difficult concepts of reliability and validity. A number of you didn't get any marks at all because you were discussing split half, which is actually a measure of assessing reliability rather than validity. So if anybody had said split half, you wouldn't have got any credit. It seems that of everything that we've taught you from reliability and validity, split half is the only thing that's stuck in there for a number of you. So again, I really do think that you need to go back to this because you're just kind of whipping out split half and expecting to get some marks on it. You needed to really read it carefully. If you did read it carefully, you'd see that it said, firstly, it was a question about checking internal validity. A number of you also got 0 marks on this question because you talked about ways to improve validity, which there were good answers, the ones that I saw, but they weren't answering the question. So what you needed to be talking about really was either using face validity or using concurrent validity. Now, the best answers probably did both of those. So they were saying things like you would look at the questionnaire and check whether or not it looked like it was a suitable measure of, I think it was happiness. I've not got the stimulus in front of me right now, but it was basically a lot of students were getting credit anyway for saying, does the questionnaire measure what it sets out to measure? Does it measure what it claims to be measuring? And that was absolutely fine. Some people got better marks for that, so maybe 2 marks for saying that they'd get somebody else to make that judgment. So you can see here that bit in brackets. So it recommends teachers, parents, school, counsellors. So assessing face validity using someone maybe not related to the investigation and just checking whether they felt it measured what it's supposed to be measuring, what it claims to measure. The better answers were the ones that talked about concurrent validity. So students were saying here that you would basically establish a previous or an old questionnaire that measured the same thing, and you would get the participants to complete the old questionnaire as well as the new one, and then you would see whether or not they were the same. So you could get 2 marks for saying that. So assess concurrent validity by establishing how similar scores are on an old questionnaire which measured something similar and a new one. The best answers, can you see here, were the ones who talked about correlating the findings. So people who had said that you would take the old questionnaire and the new questionnaire and you would correlate those findings, and a high positive correlation of 0.8 or above would mean that it had good internal validity. They were the best answers. However, you can see there that there are up to 3 marks for explaining how the internal validity might have been established, and you could have done it in a variety of different ways. That top response there is the one that I've just been through. So concurrent validity, comparing it to another old established measure and a high positive correlation would indicate it. That would get 3 marks. But you could have done face validity and then concurrent validity and still got 3 marks. 2 marks were awarded for anything which you can see here was correct, but it was maybe less detailed. So for example, not referring to the whole idea of correlating the scores, possibly that might not have got it, or maybe not going into enough detail as to what concurrent validity is actually doing, what you're comparing and contrasting there. So again, I know I sound like a broken record, but internal validity and reliability does need a little bit of refreshing. And like I said, underneath this video link, there is a document which has got some sample answers on for those questions. Right, into the big design question. Just a couple of things here. With this design study question, it's one of those things really, and every member of the department is kind of agreed on this, that it's something that you can either do or you can't do. It's not something that we can teach you how to do successfully, because every time it comes up, it's a totally random stimulus. So we can't ever kind of tell you how to actually answer these questions and give you a concise structure of exactly what to include. All kind of like the practice that you put into this will pay off. So therefore, if you'd not really done anything above and beyond what you'd done in class on these design studies, which might have been a couple of lessons, it wasn't particularly well answered, because it's about kind of having a look at some different responses and seeing how good your knowledge of research methods generally is, and then obviously how well you can apply it to that STEM that's presented to you. So whilst I'm on that, it is just worth kind of pointing out to you here that out of the 12 marks available, approximately half of them are therefore appropriate, relevant justification to the specification, or to the stimulus rather, apologies, to the stimulus. So a lot of you, and I'd already said this to one of my students, one of my groups, is you think that you're justifying. So you're saying, for example, that you're going to use opportunity sample, and then you're justifying it by saying it's more convenient than other methods, and you think that that is the appropriate justification, but you're not thinking about what the stimulus is actually talking about and what the stimulus actually wants from you. So in a lot of cases, your justifications just weren't relevant to this particular question. So the question was, just to point out one thing in particular, to look at the differences between left-handeds and right-handeds in terms of their musical ability. So that kind of posed problems for a number of you, because you forgot that that's exactly what you were looking at. You were looking at the difference between lefts and rights, and the fact that there are differences that exist between them. So just to explain what I mean by that, the first 2 marks were available for offering a suitable experimental design. So experimental designs that wouldn't work here would be repeated measures. So a lot of you'd said repeated measures wouldn't be appropriate because it would result in demand characteristics. That's right, but it's got nothing to do with the STEM. The reason why repeated measures wouldn't work here is because they can't be both left-handed and right-handed. So your only options were independent measures or match pairs. So again, if you'd said independent measures, you needed to be saying that it was independent measures and justifying it because they can't be both left and right-handed, not by saying it'll avoid demand characteristics, because that really doesn't play any sort of part in this particular stimulus. So it was independent measures, lefts versus rights, or you could have done match pairs, but you again needed to say what they would be matched on. A lot of you were saying that one left-handed person would be matched to a right-handed person, but we had no idea what you would be matching them on. And again, it's got to be to do with musical ability. So that first section, a lot of you only got 1 mark, all right? So the design question, you'd picked an appropriate one, but you hadn't justified it accordingly. The same with sampling. So out of 2 marks, a lot of you just ended up with 1 mark. So a lot of you were saying opportunity sample, but then you were saying that that would be convenient. Now, if you think about it, opportunity sampling would not be convenient in this particular stimulus, because in an average classroom, for example, I asked this in my class last week, in an average classroom, you might have 1 or 2 left-handed students. So that's not convenient, because what you would have to do at that stage is then go out and find a further amount of left-handed students so that you've got an equal sample. So a lot of you just really silly errors there, just not thinking about it realistically. Furthermore, random sampling would not have worked at all in this, because again, they're not equal in terms of the amounts in the population, so you wouldn't get the same lefts and rights. Also, if you did volunteer sampling, you might end up with a load more right-handed people rather than left-handed people. So you can see here there needed to be some recognition of the fact that left-handed people are less common in the population than right-handed people, and it needed to be built into your sampling technique. Therefore, the ones that I gave 2 marks straight away to, and the only ones that I gave 2 marks straight away to, were use of stratified sampling. So stratified sampling does consider that there are different amounts of left-handed and right-handed people in the population, and you pick accordingly from those amounts of people. So sampling, again, for a lot of you was silly errors, just not thinking about what you were doing, not thinking about what you were saying, and just kind of assuming that because you knew the different sampling techniques that was going to get you the answers. So I expect lots of annotation on these design study questions. Into the procedure, this was quite specific in the way that it was broken down. So there was 1 mark for any sort of procedure, i.e. the fact that they were in an experiment, that there was going to be some different conditions. A 2nd mark for how musical ability was going to be assessed, and then a further 3 marks came from elaboration of those points. So a lot of students did get 2 marks, all right? You had done the bog standard, you had given some sort of procedure that there were going to be different conditions, and you had said that you were assessing musical ability. However, the elaboration was not great, it has to be said. So the procedure itself needed to be in a lot more detail from a lot of you. So you didn't make reference to the fact that it would be a standardised musical test, that everybody would need to do the same thing. A lot of you didn't refer to where the participants would be tested, when the participants would be tested, how long they were given to do a specific task, what the level of distractions would be. A lot of you were talking about musical ability testing, and you didn't even say what musical instrument this would be performed on, or some of you were saying it would be performed on a musical instrument of their choice, which would totally ruin the experiment, because if it was a musical instrument of their choice, then we're assuming that they would pick something that they're better at. So you really did kind of like forget that the whole kind of like way of assessing them in terms of their musical ability needed to be standardised. Those of you who said a matched pairs and said that you'd already pre-assessed them and pre-matched them on musical ability, you did a little bit better in terms of your procedure, but again, lack of kind of logical thought here, so not great in terms of what the musical tests actually were and the fact that it should have been standardised. Again, there is sample answers on Moodle for this question, so if you have achieved maybe half marks or less on this particular question, you really do need to go back and have a look at where you kind of went wrong. So to finish up with the procedure bit, you also needed to come up with a very kind of like accessible way of assessing musical ability, and for a number of you it just wouldn't have worked. It wasn't an actual measure of musical ability. So for example, you were just saying that you would have some teachers listen to them. listen to, it was kind of like listen to what. When I was marking these, I just kind of saying, yeah, and what are they recording? What scores are they giving them? What's it going to be out of? So for a lot of you, again, you think that you've done that. You think that you've said that you're measuring them in terms of musical ability, but it wasn't operationalized. It wasn't clear. It wasn't identical for all participants. And I wasn't sure how it was going to be scored. So the procedure was quite poor for a number of you, and a lot of you were only getting 1 or 2 out of 5 there. The debrief, it has to be said, was probably the best part of this design process. A lot of you were very, very competent and really kind of good in terms of offering a very detailed debrief. However, there are a number of you who dropped marks on that section for the same reason as what you did for the consent form, that it wasn't written in a way that could be read out to them. So you'd kind of given lots of detail of what would go into a debrief, but you hadn't actually written it to the participants. And if you reread the stimulus, the bullet point actually says a suitable debrief for the participants. So it should have been written to them. So whilst I've just referenced those bullet points there, it is important to just mention a few general flaws that we're finding on these 12-mark design study questions. And one of them is that you are not paying attention to what the bullet pointed list actually says. So when you were being taught this material by your teachers, we will have all said to you that there are a number of things that you might be asked to do in a design study question, but you only have to do what is listed in the bullet points. Anything that you do above and beyond that is an absolute waste of time. So there are a number of candidates here in all classes that I marked certainly, where you just wasted time. You'd done things that weren't requested in that bullet pointed list. So you wouldn't get credit for it. I think on most occasions I just basically crossed it out. You really do need to learn to follow the instructions on one of those design study questions. Furthermore, little bugbear, any bullet point should be a subheading. So you can see the subheadings here on the mark scheme. That's what you should be using in your assessment, in your answer. So that's this first section on research methods. I'm going to stop that now. If you just kind of pause and look back over your general mistakes on that section before doing the attachment topic.